You can't do that in a garage. There's just a few places in the world with the right equipment and only a few people in the world with the right training to be able to do that.
There are only 59 Bugatti Chiron per sports left on the planet that can still call themselves whole. The 60th sits in a British workshop, in pieces, at the center of a standoff that pulled a multi-billion-dollar hypercar manufacturer into a public argument with a mechanic and his dad. This is the story of how a wrecked purple Bugatti in Miami turned into a referendum on who really owns a car once you've paid for it, and how the CEO of Bugatti, Mat Armstrong, responded in a way almost nobody expected. The car at the heart of all this belongs to Florida-based content creator Alex Gonzalez, known online as Salex. His Chiron per sport wasn't a stranger to trouble even before the crash that made headlines. He'd already cracked the rear carbon wing doing squats on it, of all things. But the real damage came when the car's nose collided with the back of a small Japanese K truck. For most cars, that's a fender bender. For a $4 million hypercar of which only 60 were ever built, it was closer to a death sentence. The front end took the brunt of it. Airbags deployed, the carbon fiber tub cracked, headlights shattered, and the transmission mounts, components engineers deliberately designed to fail in a crash so they redirect force away from the passenger cell, tore apart exactly as intended. A Bugatti technician flew in from France to inspect the wreckage and delivered the verdict quickly: total loss. Insurance paid out, and the car was given a salvage title and listed on Copart, the online wreck vehicle auction site. Here's where the story takes its first strange turn. Gonzalez didn't walk away. He bought his own crashed hypercar back from the salvage auction, reportedly for somewhere around $1.60 to $1.90 million, a steep markdown from the $4+ million these cars normally command when they're in one piece. He wasn't done with it. He wanted it back on the road, and rather than ship it to Bugatti's factory in Molsheim, France, he decided to see if it could be fixed privately. That decision is what set the entire saga in motion, because Bugatti had other plans. When Gonzalez turned down Bugatti's factory repair quote, reported at roughly $1.7 million for parts alone, the manufacturer didn't just decline to get involved. According to multiple accounts of the situation, Bugatti locked the car's VIN in its global systems, meaning no authorized Bugatti dealer anywhere in the world, from France to Dubai, was permitted to sell so much as a bolt for that specific chassis. Effectively, the car was blacklisted. If you wanted parts, your only route was a factory-supervised repair on Bugatti's terms, at Bugatti's price. To put those prices in perspective, a pair of headlights was quoted at around $174,000. Each front fender ran close to $200,000. A section of carbon hood was roughly $58,000, and the horseshoe grille surround, the small chrome nose emblem that says Bugatti to anyone within 100 yards, was priced around $93,000. For comparison, that single grille costs more than most people's entire car. Gonzalez didn't quietly accept it. In late 2025, he posted an ultimatum on social media: give him 24 hours to lift the blacklist, or he'd start 3D printing the parts himself. It was a bold, almost theatrical threat, but it landed at a moment when the entire story had already picked up serious momentum online, because by then, British YouTuber Mat Armstrong had entered the picture. Armstrong has built his entire channel around a simple premise: buy something that everyone else has written off, and bring it back from the dead. He's rebuilt BMWs, Lamborghinis, and Ferraris, but nothing on the scale of a Bugatti hypercar. When he heard about the wrecked Chiron per sport sitting in Miami, he booked a flight across the Atlantic before the car could disappear into someone else's garage or the auction system for good. The trip itself started with its own chaos. On the way to inspect the Bugatti, a Chevrolet cut across traffic and hit a Ferrari being driven by one of Armstrong's crew, leaving him with two crashed exotic cars to deal with before he even started. But once he got eyes on the Chiron, the scale of the challenge became clear. The front end was crumpled, the airbags were spent, the carbon fiber was cracked in multiple places, and the transmission mounts, those parts engineered to snap under impact, had torn far worse than initial reports suggested. What was first described as a hairline fracture turned out to be a much larger tear on both sides, serious enough that the team had to pull the entire engine out of the car to get a proper look. Most people looking at a $1.7 million parts bill and a factory that refuses to help would walk away. Armstrong didn't. Instead of treating unrepairable as a technical fact, he treated it as a business decision that Bugatti had made, not a law of physics. With his father Tony, a veteran mechanic, alongside him, Armstrong began working through the car's problems using tools and techniques a long way from Bugatti's climate-controlled Multium facility. One of the biggest hurdles was the transmission itself. Bugatti's own position, echoed by Rimac, was that separating the front and rear sections of a Chiron to access the drivetrain required specialized jigs and equipment found in only a couple of facilities on Earth. Doing it in an ordinary garage, the thinking went, risk turning a wrecked hypercar into a completely destroyed one. Armstrong's team did it anyway. Rather than exotic hydraulic rigs, they used more ordinary shop equipment, working through the bolts holding the front and rear halves together. It turned out that once you got past the mystique, the Chiron structure was more modular than it can only be done at two places in the world. Narrative suggested, a case of removing the right fasteners in the right order rather than needing proprietary factory machinery. The transmission separated from the rest of the car, and Armstrong's team could finally get a full look at the internal damage. What they found was a mix of good and bad news. The legendary W16 engine itself had survived, but the transmission mounts were torn on both sides, and the gearbox housing, the part Bugatti wanted to replace wholesale rather than repair, was a serious structural question mark. Rather than pay for an entirely new housing at factory prices, Armstrong brought in a specialist to TIG weld the damaged mount back together, a repair many assumed wasn't possible on a component that's specifically designed to be sacrificial in a crash. From there, the improvisation kept going. When Bugatti-specific coolant lines and small components weren't available because of the parts freeze, the team found workarounds, a length of rigid brake hose here, a locally sourced part there. When airbags were needed, they were sourced from an Audi A3, a detail that went viral in its own right, a multi-million-dollar Bugatti hypercar running components from a compact hatchback that shares more of its parts bin with Volkswagen Group's siblings than most owners probably realize. A specialist shop, Valvetronic, built a custom exhaust system for the car since a factory replacement wasn't on the table. Piece by piece, panel by panel, the car that Bugatti had declared functionally dead started looking like a car again. This is usually the part of the story where a global luxury brand sends a cease and desist letter and the conversation ends. That's not what happened here. Mat Rimac, the CEO of Bugatti Rimac, is not a typical legacy brand executive. He built his own company from scratch, starting with an electric conversion of an old BMW in his garage before eventually taking over as CEO of Bugatti itself. So when Gonzalez posted his 24-hour ultimatum about 3D printing parts, Rimac didn't stay silent, and he didn't send lawyers. He reached out directly, engaging with Gonzalez and, by extension, the wider audience that had been following the saga through Armstrong's channel. Rimac's message wasn't dismissive. He acknowledged that a lot of what circulates online about Bugatti's repair costs and policies isn't accurate, and he made the case that some of the most safety-critical components on the car, the gearbox and the carbon fiber monocoque in particular, genuinely can't be 3D printed with home equipment and still be trusted at speeds well north of 200 miles per hour. That's a fair engineering point, and it's one that even Armstrong, to his credit, didn't dismiss outright. But then came the actual reversal. According to Gonzalez, Bugatti removed the VIN blacklist. Rimac indicated the company wanted to help find a more cost-efficient repair path, and suggested that if the monocoque and gearbox didn't need full replacement, the real cost of getting the car back on the road would be far below the eye-watering figures that had been circulating. Bugatti also reportedly offered Gonzalez a revised repair estimate closer to $600,000, still a serious sum, but a fraction of the original $1.7 million quote, which Gonzalez ultimately turned down in favor of continuing the independent route with Armstrong. Rimac even extended an open invitation for the car to be brought to the Multium facility if Armstrong wanted Bugatti's involvement directly. Armstrong, for his part, responded on his own channel, visibly surprised that Bugatti's leadership was watching his videos at all, let alone engaging with them. He made clear he wasn't trying to start a conflict with the brand, this had been Gonzalez's choice to go the private repair route rather than send the car back to France, but he also wasn't backing down from finishing the job himself. What makes this story bigger than one car is what it exposed along the way. Bugatti's mystique has always rested partly on the idea that these machines exist on a different plane from ordinary cars, that they require facilities, tools, and expertise that simply don't exist outside the factory gates. Armstrong's rebuild chipped away at that idea piece by piece. The transmission split that supposedly required one of only 2 facilities on Earth turned out to be achievable with patience and the right bolts removed in sequence. The Audi-sourced airbags and shared underlying components were a reminder that even the most exclusive hypercars sit on top of a much larger, much more ordinary parts ecosystem shared across the wider Volkswagen Group. None of that erases the genuine engineering that goes into a car capable of the speeds a Chiron per sport can reach, and Rimac's caution about structural, safety-critical components wasn't wrong. A cracked carbon tub or an improperly repaired gearbox at those speeds isn't a hypothetical risk. But the saga did puncture the idea that unrepairable is purely a technical judgment rather than, at least in part, a business one. By the time the front and rear halves of the Chiron were bolted back together, with a custom exhaust fitted and new coolant lines routed through improvised parts, Armstrong's team got the car running again, not without a few tense moments, including a wave of online concern over a possible crack near one of the repaired sections that ultimately turned out to be a false alarm. The Chiron isn't finished, and it will likely never carry an official Bugatti stamp of approval or show up at a concours event. But it's alive, it runs, and it exists as proof that the line between factory-only and garage possible is a lot blurrier than manufacturers like to admit. For Bugatti, the entire episode arrived at an interesting moment. The company is in the middle of unveiling its next generation of hypercar, the Tourbillon, built around a naturally aspirated V16 rather than the Chiron's quad-turbo W16, a deliberate pivot toward mechanical transparency and analog engineering that Rimac himself has described in almost watch-like terms. Whether or not the Armstrong saga directly influenced that direction, the timing lines up with a broader shift in how the brand is choosing to present itself, less untouchable monolith, more engineering story that invites people in rather than shutting them out. What's clear is that Rimac's choice to engage directly, rather than escalate through lawyers, changed the outcome. A YouTuber with a workshop in the English Midlands forced one of the most exclusive car brands in the world to reconsider a total loss verdict, and the brand's own CEO chose conversation over confrontation. Whether that becomes a template for how legacy manufacturers handle the YouTube generation, or just a one-off exception born from Rimac's own garage builder background, is something the rest of the industry will be watching closely.